I can fix that, Mr. Sterling.
Sterling Ashford laughed.
A black delivery dog wants to touch my Rolls Royce?
I said I can fix. Shut your mouth.
Ashford slapped the package out of Derek's hands, grabbed his collar, yanked him toward the camera.
Look at this, America. This is what the bottom of the food chain looks like. Black hands on a $500,000 car over my dead body.
Let go of me.
Or what? Fix my car, peasant. And when you fail, bark.
That's all dogs like you are good for. Derek stood up, wiped the dust off, looked straight into the lens. 20 minutes, and you're going to regret every...
I can fix that, Mr. Sterling.
Sterling Ashford laughed.
A black delivery dog wants to touch my Rolls Royce?
I said I can fix. Shut your mouth.
Ashford slapped the package out of Derek's hands, grabbed his collar, yanked him toward the camera.
Look at this, America. This is what the bottom of the food chain looks like. Black hands on a $500,000 car over my dead body.
Let go of me.
Or what? Fix my car, peasant. And when you fail, bark.
That's all dogs like you are good for. Derek stood up, wiped the dust off, looked straight into the lens. 20 minutes, and you're going to regret every word you just said. What happened next turned him into the man 15 million people couldn't stop watching. 12 years old. That's how old Derek Owens was the first time he pulled a carburetor apart with his bare hands. His father, Earl Owens, ran a one-bay garage on the corner of Dowling Street in 3rd Ward, Houston. No sign out front, no website, just a roll-up door that stuck halfway and a reputation that stretched 6 blocks in every direction. Earl fixed diesel trucks for the working men, long-haul drivers, construction crews, anyone who couldn't afford dealership prices but needed their rig running by Monday morning. Derek grew up on that concrete floor. Before he could ride a bike, he could name every socket in his father's toolbox. By 8, he was swapping spark plugs. By 10, he could listen to an engine idle and tell you which cylinder was misfiring. Earl never praised him. He'd just nod and say, "Again, faster." The garage smelled like motor oil and black coffee. It sounded like impact wrenches and gospel radio. It was the only classroom Derek ever needed. At 18, he enlisted. United States Army. Military Occupational Specialty 91L. Construction Equipment Repairer. But Derek didn't just repair construction equipment. Within 2 years, he was the go-to mechanic for anything with an engine and a problem nobody else could solve. Humvees, 5-ton trucks, even the M1 Abrams, a 70-ton tank with a gas turbine engine that most mechanics wouldn't touch without a manual. Derek didn't need the manual. He did 2 tours in Iraq, Fallujah, Tikrit. The kind of places where a broken engine didn't mean a late delivery, it meant men didn't come home. He once rebuilt a fuel injection system on an armored vehicle while mortar rounds hit the dirt 200 meters away. His hands didn't shake. They never shook. 8 years, 2 combat citations, an honorable discharge, and a skill set that belonged in an engineering lab. He came home and landed a job at Harrington and Cole, the most exclusive luxury vehicle workshop in Houston. Bentley, Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce. The clients wore watches that cost more than Derek's apartment. But none of that mattered under the hood. What mattered was that Derek could hear things other mechanics couldn't. He could feel a misalignment through his fingertips that a diagnostic computer would miss. 4 years as their lead diagnostic engineer. 4 years of solving problems that stumped factory-trained technicians. 4 years of making rich men's toys purr like new. Then a new manager came in, looked at the team roster, saw one name without a college degree next to it. Derek was out by Friday. No severance, no reference letter, no explanation beyond restructuring. The man who could rebuild a tank engine in a combat zone wasn't qualified enough for a piece of paper on a wall. His savings ran out in 5 months. Then the apartment. Then his wife, Clara, who said she loved him but couldn't love what he was becoming. A man who sat in the dark staring at his hands like they'd betrayed him. He started driving a delivery truck because it was the first application that called back. $11 an hour, brown uniform, a route through the same wealthy neighborhoods where he used to service the cars in the driveways. He kept his military toolbox under the bed in his studio apartment. Every wrench wiped clean, every socket in its place. A habit the Army gave him that nothing, not the firing, not the divorce, not the $11 hours, could take away. Nobody at work knew. Nobody on his route knew. The man handing packages to mansions had once been the best mechanic the United States Army had ever trained. Until today. Until a billionaire with a dead Rolls-Royce and a camera made the worst mistake of his life. The Rolls-Royce Phantom sitting in Sterling Ashford's driveway was worth $460,000. Hand-stitched leather. A 6.7-liter twin-turbo V12 that was supposed to whisper like silk at idle and scream like a jet on the highway. It was the crown jewel of a man who collected things just to prove he could. Now it sat dead, hood up, engine silent. A very expensive paperweight baking in the Houston sun. It had started 3 days ago. The engine would fire, run for 3 seconds, then cut. No warning, no sputtering, just gone. Like someone flipped a switch inside the block. Ashford had called the authorized Rolls-Royce dealer first. They sent 2 technicians in a white van with factory diagnostic tools and matching polo shirts. They plugged in their computers, ran every scan in the system. The ECU flagged 6 different codes, none of them consistent, none of them pointing to the same problem. Their diagnosis: replace the entire engine control unit. Cost: $45,000. Lead time: 3 weeks, shipped from the factory in Goodwood, England. Ashford told them to get out. He called an independent specialist next, a man named Voss, who ran a European import shop on the West Side. Voss had a reputation: 20 years with German and British engines. He was expensive but thorough. He spent 4 hours under the hood, checked fuel pressure at the rail, checked ignition timing across all 12 cylinders, pulled the high-pressure fuel pump, inspected it, replaced it with a brand new Bosch unit. The engine fired, ran for 3 seconds, died. Voss packed his tools in silence and left without looking Ashford in the eye. The third team came from Dallas, a 2-man crew who advertised themselves as forced induction specialists, turbos and superchargers, nothing else. They flew in on Ashford's private jet, spent 6 hours pulling boost pressure logs and analyzing wastegate behavior. Their conclusion? The wastegate actuator was sticking intermittently, failing to regulate boost pressure. They replaced the actuator, recalibrated the turbo control module, and ran the engine. 3 seconds. Dead. They charged Ashford $8,000 for the wrong answer and caught a flight home before he could throw something at them. By the time Derek Owens walked up that driveway with a wine package, Sterling Ashford had burned through $63,000 on 3 failed repair attempts. His party guests, real estate investors, a retired senator named Caldwell, and Judge Patricia Whitmore, had watched each team arrive with confidence and leave with excuses. The humiliation wasn't just mechanical, it was personal. A man who controlled a $3 billion empire couldn't control a car in his own driveway. The Phantom's hood was still open. A drop cloth lay on the limestone with wrenches the Dallas crew hadn't bothered to collect. The engine block ticked softly as it cooled, the only sound it was willing to make. Nobody in that driveway knew what was wrong with the car. 3 teams, 14 combined years of luxury vehicle experience, factory scan tools, aftermarket computers, new parts still in their packaging. Not one of them had found it. But Derek had heard it. Standing 30 feet away, holding a package, wearing a uniform that smelled like sweat and cardboard, he'd heard the engine try to start during the Dallas team's final attempt. He'd heard the turbo spool for half a second before the ECU killed everything. And in that half second of sound, in that tiny whisper of compressed air that cut short too early, he recognized something. A sound he'd heard once before. In a different engine, in a different country, under very different circumstances. The turbo recirculation valve, not the wastegate, not the fuel pump, not the ECU. A single valve the size of a man's fist, buried deep in the intake assembly, caked with carbon deposits from months of short trips and cold starts, stuck permanently in the closed position. When it stuck, the turbo couldn't recirculate excess boost pressure back into the intake. The ECU detected the pressure anomaly, boost where there shouldn't be boost, and shut the engine down to protect itself. A safety feature doing exactly what it was designed to do. Killing the engine because one small valve wouldn't open. A $180 part. That's what had beaten 3 teams and $63,000. Derek knew because he'd fixed the same failure on a military gas turbine system in Tikrit. Different engine, same physics, same sound. The kind of diagnosis you can't learn from a scan tool or a factory manual. The kind you learn from lying under broken machines in 120-degree heat while someone shoots at you. He hadn't planned to say anything. He was going to get the signature, walk back to his truck, and finish his route. 23 more stops. That was the smart move, the safe move, the move a man making $11 an hour should make. But then Ashford opened his mouth, called him a dog, slapped his package to the ground, shoved him on camera in front of 4,000 strangers. And Derek decided that some things matter more than a paycheck. Derek walked back to the Phantom. The crowd hadn't moved. Ashford's guests stood in their half circle, champagne going warm in their glasses, watching the delivery driver they'd just seen shoved to the ground walk calmly toward the most expensive car in the driveway. Ashford followed him with the camera. You hear that, everybody? The delivery boy says 20 minutes. He zoomed in on Derek's back. This is going to be the best content I've posted all year. Derek stopped at the open hood. He looked at the engine the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, not with excitement, not with hesitation, with recognition. He'd seen this before. Not this exact engine, but this exact problem. And his hands already knew the path. He turned to Ashford. I need you to turn the key when I tell you. Excuse me? Somebody has to sit in the driver's seat and turn the key when I say. That's how a diagnostic works. Ashford's grin tightened. He wasn't used to being told what to do, especially not by a man in a brown uniform, especially not on his own property. But the camera was rolling, and 4,000 people were watching, and the story was too good to stop. Fine. He tossed the key fob to one of his guests, a young man in a blue blazer named Trent Calloway. Trent, sit in the car. Do what the delivery boy says. Trent caught the fob, glanced at Derek, and slid into the driver's seat without a word. Derek turned back to the engine. He placed both palms flat on the valve cover and closed his eyes. The metal was still warm, not hot. The engine had been off for 30 minutes, but warm enough to feel the residual heat map. His fingers spread across the surface, reading temperature differences the way a blind man reads Braille. Turn it over, Derek said. Trent hit the start button. The V12 fired, a deep, guttural roar that filled the driveway for exactly 3 seconds. Then silence. The engine cut itself off, just like it had for every other mechanic who'd tried. But Derek wasn't watching the engine when it died. He was listening. His eyes were still closed. His left hand had moved to the turbo inlet pipe. His right hand rested on the intercooler duct. And in those 3 seconds of sound, his fingers had felt what his ears had already confirmed from 30 feet away. Vibration in the inlet pipe. Normal. Pressure buildup in the intercooler. Normal. But at the junction where the recirculation valve connected to the compressor housing, there was nothing. No pulse, no movement. The valve was sealed shut. He opened his eyes. Again. Trent looked at Ashford. Ashford shrugged. Trent pressed the button. 3 seconds. The same roar, the same death. But this time, Derek's hand was directly on the recirculation valve housing. He felt the carbon-locked mechanism refuse to budge. The valve seat was welded shut by months of carbon buildup. Microscopic layers of burnt fuel residue compressed into a shell harder than the metal beneath it. That's enough. Derek straightened up and wiped his hands on his pants. Ashford pushed the camera closer. So, what's the verdict, genius? Derek didn't look at the camera. He looked at the engine. Your turbo recirculation valve is carbon-locked. It's stuck in the closed position. When the turbo builds boost, the valve can't release the excess pressure back into the intake. Your ECU reads that as a critical overpressure fault and shuts the engine down to protect itself. Silence. The kind of silence that happens when someone says something nobody in the room expected. Gavin, one of the mechanics from the Rolls-Royce dealer team who'd stayed behind to watch the circus, stepped forward from behind the senator's wife. He'd been leaning against a column, arms crossed, waiting for the delivery driver to embarrass himself. Now his arms were at his sides. "He's right," Gavin said quietly. "That's the one thing we didn't check." Ashford's grin was gone. For the first time all afternoon, he didn't have a line ready. He looked at Derek, then at Gavin, then back at Derek. The camera was still rolling. 80,000 viewers now. "So fix it," Ashford said. His voice was different, flatter. The comedy routine was over and he knew it. But the camera was still on, and Sterling Ashford didn't back down on camera. Not ever. Derek walked to his delivery truck. He opened the side panel and pulled out a steel toolbox. Olive drab, military issue, dented at the corners from a decade of use. He carried it back to the Phantom and set it on the limestone driveway with a metallic thud that echoed off the garage walls. He unlatched the box. Inside, every tool was arranged with the precision of a field kit. Wrenches, sockets, pliers, a breaker bar, a set of picks, a can of penetrating oil. Each one clean. Each one in its place. The toolbox of a man who had been trained that a lost tool in a combat zone could cost a life. He pulled out a 10mm socket and a ratchet, rolled up his sleeves, and without another word, he went to work. The live stream counter clicked past 100,000. The first bolt came off in 4 seconds. Derek's hands moved with a rhythm that didn't belong to a man in a delivery uniform. Ratchet on, quarter turn, release, quarter turn, release. The sound of it, that crisp, metallic click, 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 was steady as a heartbeat. The guests stopped talking. Even Ashford lowered his phone an inch. He started with the turbo inlet pipe. 4 bolts, 2 clamps, 1 vacuum line. He disconnected each one in order, laying the hardware on a shop rag he'd spread across the limestone. Every bolt placed in a row, left to right, in the exact sequence they'd need to go back. A habit drilled into him by Sergeant Major Wallace at Fort Hood. If you can't reassemble it blindfolded, you didn't take it apart right. The inlet pipe came free. He set it aside and moved to the intercooler duct, a curved aluminum tube that connected the turbo compressor to the charge air cooler. 2 spring clamps, 1 sensor plug. He squeezed the clamps with his bare fingers, no pliers, and slid them back. The duct came out clean. Now the recirculation valve was exposed. Sitting in a pocket of the compressor housing, bolted in with 3 T30 Torx fasteners, caked in a layer of black carbon so thick it looked like the valve had been dipped in tar. Derek leaned in close. He put his nose an inch from the valve and inhaled. The smell of burnt hydrocarbons. Sharp, acrid, layered. Months of short trips and cold starts. The engine had never been driven hard enough to burn the carbon off naturally. This was a car that went from mansion to restaurant to country club and back. Never above 4,000 RPM. The turbo barely woke up before the engine shut down again. And every time it did, a little more carbon condensed on the valve seat. Layer after layer, month after month, until the valve couldn't open at all. He pulled a pick from his toolbox, a dental-style hook with a tungsten carbide tip, and scraped the edge of the valve housing. The carbon came off in flakes, revealing bright aluminum underneath like skin beneath a scab. "This valve hasn't moved in 6 months," Derek said. Not to Ashford, not to the camera. He was talking to the engine. "You've been choking." Gavin had moved closer. He was standing 3 feet from Derek now, watching every movement with the focus of a student who just realized his teacher had been standing in the back of the classroom the whole time. "How did you know?" he asked. "From 30 feet away. How did you know it was the recirc valve and not the wastegate?" Derek didn't look up. "Different sound. A stuck wastegate bleeds boost slowly. The engine would surge before it dies. You'd hear a wobble like a washing machine off balance. This one cuts clean. No surge. No hesitation. The ECU sees full boost with 0 recirculation flow and panics. Instant shutdown." Gavin stared at him. I've worked on these cars for 6 years. I've never heard anyone describe it like that." Spend enough time listening to engines break in a combat zone, you learn what each failure sounds like. Every failure has a voice. A stuck wastegate sounds like a cough. A bad injector sounds like a hiccup. A cracked exhaust manifold sounds like a man wheezing through a broken rib. And this? He tapped the carbon-locked valve with the pick. This sounds like a door slamming shut. Judge Patricia Whitmore stepped forward from the edge of the group. She was a small woman, mid-60s, silver hair pulled back tight, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. The kind of face that had heard 10,000 lies from the bench and learned to recognize truth on sight. "Where did you serve?" she asked. "Iraq, ma'am. 2 tours, 1st Armored Division." "What did you do there?" "Fix things that had to work, or people died." She nodded once, held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she stepped back, pulled out her phone, and started recording on her own, separate from Ashford's stream, her own record. Derek returned to the valve. 3 T30 Torx bolts held the assembly in place. Normally a 5-minute job, but the carbon had cemented the bolt heads into their sockets like concrete. A standard Torx bit would round them out in a heartbeat. He reached into his toolbox and pulled out a set of extraction sockets, 6-point reverse threaded, designed to bite harder the more resistance they met. Military surplus. He'd bought them at a swap meet in Killeen, Texas for $12. They'd saved him more times than he could count. First bolt. Extraction socket on. Breaker bar attached. Slow, steady pressure. Not forcing it, letting physics and leverage do the work. The bolt resisted. 5 seconds. 7 seconds. Then, a soft crack, like a knuckle popping. "1," Derek said. Second bolt. Same process. Same patience. Same crack. 2. Third bolt. This one was the worst. The carbon had fused with corrosion from a slow-leaking intake gasket, creating a bond that was part chemical, part mechanical. Derek reached for the penetrating oil, a small can of Croil, the gold standard among mechanics. He sprayed the bolt head, watched the amber liquid wick into the threads, and waited. 60 seconds. He counted them in his head the way he'd been taught. 1 1,000, 2 1,000. Because rushing penetrating oil was the fastest way to snap a bolt and turn a 20-minute job into a 2-day nightmare. 60 seconds passed. He applied the extraction socket. Pressure. The bolt didn't move. He added the extension pipe to his breaker bar, 18 inches of steel tube that tripled his leverage. Applied pressure again. The veins in his forearm stood out like cables. Sweat ran down his temples and dripped onto the engine block, sizzling faintly on the warm aluminum. The driveway was so quiet you could hear the oil ticking inside the can. 15 seconds. 20. Crack. 3. He pulled the valve assembly free and held it up in the afternoon sun. The recirculation valve, a disc the size of a hockey puck, was black, completely sealed with compressed carbon. The spring behind it was frozen solid. The valve seat was eroded where carbon had eaten into the aluminum like rust eats iron. He turned and held it toward Ashford's camera. "This is your problem. $180 part. $63,000 and 3 teams couldn't find it because they were looking at screens instead of listening to the engine." The live stream chat was a waterfall, comments moving so fast they blurred into a white stream. 120,000 people watching a man in a sweat-stained uniform hold up a small black disc and explain in plain English exactly why a $500,000 car wouldn't start. And he wasn't done yet. Derek set the valve assembly on the shop rag and studied it the way a jeweler studies a cracked diamond. The carbon wasn't just on the surface, it had migrated into the valve seat, the precision-machined ring where the disc made its seal. If the seat was scored, cleaning wouldn't be enough. The valve would leak, the turbo would underperform, and the engine would throw new codes within a week. He tilted the assembly toward the sun and ran his thumbnail across the seat. Smooth in some places, rough in others. The carbon had etched shallow grooves into the aluminum, not deep enough to condemn the part, but deep enough that a factory technician would call it compromised and order a new one. 3 weeks, minimum. Derek didn't have a new one. He didn't have 3 weeks. He had his hands, his toolbox, and the same stubborn refusal to quit that had kept engines running in places where quitting meant dying. So he'd do what he'd always done, make it work with what he had. He pulled a sheet of 2,000 grit wet sandpaper from a plastic sleeve in his toolbox. Then a small tube of metal polishing compound, the kind machinists use on valve seats in racing engines. Then a flat piece of glass, 6 inches square, wrapped in a microfiber cloth. The glass was his reference surface, optically flat. He'd carried it in his kit since the Army. Gavin watched him lay the sandpaper on the glass and frowned. "You're going to lap it by hand? Only way to guarantee a flat surface. Machine lapping would be faster, but a machine isn't here. I am." He placed the valve seat face down on the sandpaper and began to move it in a figure-8 pattern. Slow, deliberate. The pressure had to be perfectly even. Too much on one side and he'd create a high spot that would prevent the disc from sealing. Too little and the carbon grooves would remain. Figure-8, figure-8, figure-8. His wrist moved in the same arc every time, like a metronome made of muscle and bone. The sandpaper whispered against the aluminum. Fine gray paste, a slurry of aluminum dust and carbon residue collected around the edges like wet ash. "That's how we did it in the field," Derek said, not looking up. "No machine shop in Fallujah, no parts warehouse. You had what you carried and you made it work. I lapped a turbo seal on top of an ammo crate once. 115 degrees, sand in everything. Sergeant Major said if that Humvee didn't run by sundown, we were walking 12 miles back to base through hostile territory." He paused. It ran. He lifted the valve and inspected the seat, wiped it with a clean rag, held it at an angle to catch the light. The grooves were shallower now, but still visible, thin lines that would catch air and destroy the seal. He went back to work. 3 more minutes of lapping. Check. Still there. 2 more minutes. Check. The rhythm never changed. The pressure never wavered. Finally, after 8 full minutes of patient, silent work, he held the seat up one more time. The surface caught the afternoon sun in a continuous, unbroken reflection. No grooves, no scratches, no imperfections. Mirror smooth. A factory finish achieved with sandpaper, glass, and 2 hands that refused to rush. He moved to the valve disc. The disc was stainless steel, harder than the aluminum seat, but the carbon on its face was just as thick. He clamped the disc gently between his thumb and forefinger and used a razor blade to shave the carbon away in thin curls. Each stroke removed a layer no thicker than a fingernail. Patient, precise. Underneath, the stainless steel was still clean. No pitting, no erosion. Ashford had been silent for nearly 12 minutes. The longest silence anyone on that driveway had ever heard from him. He stood 6 feet from Derek, camera still recording, but the commentary had stopped. His lips parted twice like he wanted to say something clever, something cutting, but nothing came out. There was nothing to mock. A man was performing surgery on a car part with a razor blade and wet sandpaper, and every person watching, on the driveway and on the live stream, knew they were seeing something that couldn't be faked. "You're wasting your time," Ashford said finally. But his voice had no edge, no performance. It was the voice of a man who needed to fill silence, because silence was making him feel something he didn't want to name. Derek didn't respond. He applied a thin layer of polishing compound to the disc, buffed it with the microfiber cloth in tight circular motions, and held it up. The stainless steel face gleamed like a surgical instrument. He placed the disc back into the valve body, compressed the return spring. It resisted at first, the carbon having stiffened the coils, but it released with a clean pop. He tested the range of motion by pressing the disc open and closed with his index finger. Open, closed, open, closed. Smooth and even. No sticking, no hesitation. The valve moved the way it was designed to move. Freely, fully, without resistance. "She's ready," he said. He carried the restored assembly back to the Phantom. The reinstallation was a mirror image of the removal, the same motions in reverse, muscle memory guiding every connection. 3 Torx bolts, torqued to spec by feel. Most mechanics needed a torque wrench for this. Derek had his hands. He could sense the exact moment a fastener seated into its proper tension. The way the resistance changed from elastic to solid, the subtle click that traveled through the ratchet handle into his palm. He'd been doing it since he was 14 in his father's garage, tightening head bolts on diesel blocks while Earl watched, and said nothing unless he was wrong. Bolt 1. Snug. Quarter turn past snug. Stop. Bolt 2. Same feel. Same stop. Bolt 3. Tighter. The gasket surface required more compression. He compensated automatically, adding a fraction more rotation before his hand told his brain to stop. Intercooler duct reconnected. Spring clamps seated. Sensor plug clicked home. Turbo inlet pipe bolted back on. 4 bolts, 2 clamps, vacuum line. Every fastener returned to its hole in reverse order, exactly as he'd laid them out on the rag. He stepped back and surveyed the engine bay. Everything was where it belonged. No leftover hardware, no extra bolts on the rag. The engine bay looked exactly as it had before he'd touched it, minus the $63,000 problem that was now sitting on a shop rag, cleaned, restored, and reinstalled. Derek wiped his hands on his pants, looked at Trent, still sitting in the driver's seat. One more time. The driveway went still. 200,000 people on the live stream, 7 guests on the limestone, 1 man in the driver's seat with his finger hovering over the start button, and Derek Owens standing beside the open hood of a Rolls-Royce Phantom, hands black with carbon and oil, watching the engine he'd just reassembled the way a surgeon watches a flatline monitor after restarting a heart. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even the Houston heat seemed to pause, the afternoon hanging in the air like held breath. Derek placed his left hand flat on the intake manifold. He wanted to feel it, not just hear it, but feel the moment the engine decided whether his work was good enough. "Go," he said. Trent pressed the button. The starter motor engaged. The V12 turned over once, a low, heavy groan of 12 pistons compressing air. Twice, the compression built. On the 3rd rotation, the spark plugs fired, and the engine caught. Not the way it had before. Not that desperate 3-second gasp followed by silence and shame. This was different. This was a 6.7-liter V12 waking up the way its engineers in Goodwood, England, had designed it to wake up. The 12 cylinders found their rhythm, firing in sequence, each one a controlled explosion no bigger than a fist, 60 times per second. The twin turbos spooled. Derek felt it under his palm before he heard it, a vibration that started deep in the block and rose through the manifold like a pulse returning to a body. Then the sound arrived. A rising whistle that climbed from a murmur to a hum to a smooth, continuous whine as the compressor wheels reached operating speed and the recirculation valve, his valve, the one he'd cleaned with sandpaper and a razor blade, opened and closed in its natural cycle, breathing the way it was supposed to breathe. The exhaust note deepened. The idle settled at 650 revolutions per minute, rock steady. And the dashboard, which had been a Christmas tree of amber and red warning lights for 3 days, began to go dark. One by one, the lights blinked out. Engine management, turbo fault, oil pressure warning, emissions, traction control. Gone. Every single one. Gone. The Phantom was alive. The sound it made was something no one on that driveway would ever forget. Not the crude roar of a machine starting up. Something finer. A V12 twin turbo running clean for the first time in 6 months. The way $500,000 of British engineering was supposed to sound. Deep, even, layered. A resonance that traveled through the chassis, through the limestone, through the souls of every person standing within 20 feet. The kind of sound that justified the price tag because nothing else in the world could replicate it. Derek's hand was still on the manifold. He could feel every cylinder firing in perfect sequence. No misfire, no stumble, no anomaly. Boost pressure cycling correctly. Recirculation valve opening and closing on schedule. The ECU running through its self-check and finding nothing wrong. For the first time in 3 days, the engine's own computer agreed with the man standing over it. 3 seconds passed, then 5, then 10. The engine didn't stop. 15 seconds, 20, 30. It wasn't going to stop. Derek exhaled. A long, slow breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His shoulders dropped half an inch. His hand lifted off the manifold and hung at his side, fingers still trembling. Not from nerves, but from the sustained grip pressure of 20 minutes of precision work in the Texas heat. Gavin was the first to move. He stepped forward, placed both hands on the fender next to where Derek's had been, and felt the engine running beneath his palms. He stood there for 3 full seconds, reading the vibration the way Derek had taught him to read it in the last 20 minutes, with his body, not a computer. Then he pulled back and looked at Derek with an expression that mixed disbelief, admiration, and something that looked very much like shame. Shame that he'd arrived on this driveway with a factory scan tool and a Rolls-Royce dealer badge and missed what a delivery driver with a plastic tube stethoscope had found in 3 seconds. "I owe you an apology," Gavin said. "I should have caught that." Derek shook his head. "You looked where they trained you to look. That's not your fault. But the engine doesn't care about your training. It tells you what's wrong. You just have to be willing to listen." Then came the applause. It started with Judge Whitmore, a slow, deliberate clap. Not the polite applause of a dinner party, but the measured recognition of someone who understood exactly what had just happened and what it meant. Senator Caldwell joined, his heavy hands producing a sound like a gavel. Then Trent from inside the car tapping the steering wheel. Then 2 of the investor wives. Then the investors. It spread through the small crowd like a wave until every person on that driveway was clapping. Every person except one. Sterling Ashford stood where he'd been standing for the last 20 minutes. Phone in his right hand, screen still facing the engine, 230,000 people watching him not clap. The comments section had become a wildfire. Heart emojis, flame emojis, all caps praise for Derek streaming past faster than anyone could read. And beneath the praise, growing louder with every second, something else. Something directed at Ashford. Something that hadn't been there when the stream started. Anger. Real anger. The kind that doesn't burn out overnight. Ashford's jaw was locked. His eyes moved from the running engine to Derek to the phone screen and back. He could see the comments. He could read them. He knew, with the instinct of a man who'd spent his career controlling narratives, that the narrative had just flipped. Completely. Irreversibly. 20 minutes ago, he was the star of his own show, and Derek was the punchline. Now Derek was the hero of a story that 250,000 people were sharing in real time. And Ashford was the villain they'd remember. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Lucky guess," he said. Nobody responded. The applause had faded into a silence that was heavier than any insult Ashford had ever thrown. A silence that said, "We saw everything. We saw exactly what you are, and we're not going to forget." Derek closed the hood of the Phantom. The latch clicked with a clean mechanical precision, the sound of a car made whole. He walked to the front steps where the wine package still lay on the ground, dented from the slap that had started all of this. He picked it up, brushed the limestone dust off the label, carried it to the front door and set it gently on the welcome mat. Then he walked back to Ashford, stood in front of him. Not aggressive, not proud, not performing, just present. One man facing another. "Your package, Mr. Ashford, and your car runs fine now. The valve will hold for a while, but you should order a replacement within 30 days. And tell whoever drives it to take it on the highway once a week. Open it up. Let the turbos breathe. Short trips and cold starts killed that valve. Don't let it happen again." Ashford said nothing. His phone was still recording. His mouth was a thin line. Derek turned and walked toward his delivery truck. His boots crunched on the limestone. His uniform was soaked through. Sweat, oil, carbon dust, penetrating fluid. He looked like a man who'd spent an hour inside an engine because he had. He didn't wave, didn't look back, didn't ask for payment, a thank you, a business card, or an apology. Judge Whitmore lowered her phone. She'd recorded the entire repair. 11 minutes from the first bolt to the last clap. That evening, she would upload it to every platform she had with a caption that read, "This is what skill looks like when the world tells you to sit down." Derek climbed into his delivery truck, started the engine, a 4-cylinder turbo diesel that sounded like a sewing machine after the Phantom's V12. He pulled his route sheet from the sun visor and checked the next address. 22 more stops. He put the truck in gear and pulled out of the driveway. The iron gates closed behind him. On the other side, the Phantom idled on the limestone, purring. the sound carrying across the manicured lawn and through the hedges and out into the Houston afternoon, where it mixed with the fading rumble of a delivery truck heading south on Kirby Drive. 2 engines, both running. One worth $500,000, the other worth a man's dignity. Only one of them had been fixed by the man the world just watched get called a dog. The video hit 1 million views before midnight. Judge Whitmore uploaded her recording at 7:14 p.m., 11 minutes and 32 seconds. No edits, no filters, no music. Just a delivery driver in a stained uniform fixing a Rolls-Royce on a billionaire's driveway while the billionaire stood there holding a camera and running out of things to say. By 9 p.m., it was on Twitter. By 10 p.m., it was on Reddit, TikTok, and Facebook simultaneously. By midnight, every major reshare account in the country had picked it up. The comments were a flood. Not a trickle, not a stream, a flood. Hundreds per minute. Thousands per hour. The hashtag came first. Hashtag #FixMyCarPeasant. It trended #1 in the United States by 2 a.m. By sunrise, it was trending in 14 countries. Then came the investigations. People don't just watch a video like that, they dig. And the internet is very, very good at digging. Within 12 hours, someone found Derek's military service record. MOS 91L. 1st Armored Division, 2 tours in Iraq, 2 combat citations, an honorable discharge with a service jacket that read like a manual for mechanical excellence. The record circulated on veteran forums first, then broke into the mainstream when a retired master sergeant named Tom Wallace, Derek's former commanding officer, posted a video of his own. Wallace sat in his living room in San Antonio wearing a faded Army t-shirt and spoke directly into the camera. His voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. That man you saw on the ground? Private First Class Derek Owens, best mechanic I ever served with, bar none. I watched him rebuild a fuel injection system on an M1 Abrams while mortars hit the dirt 200 meters from our position. His hands didn't shake then, they didn't shake today. And the man who shoved him to the ground wouldn't have lasted 30 seconds in the places Derek kept us alive. The video got 4 million views in 6 hours. Then Harrison Cole spoke up. The actual owner of Harrington & Cole, the luxury workshop that had fired Derek 4 years ago. Cole released a written statement first, then, when the statement wasn't enough to stop the backlash, a video. He sat behind his desk, visibly uncomfortable, and admitted on camera that letting Derek go was the single greatest professional mistake I have ever made. He explained that a new operations manager had implemented a policy requiring all technicians to hold a minimum of an associate's degree. Derek, whose education came from a garage in 3rd Ward and the United States Army, didn't qualify on paper. Cole had signed off on the termination without reviewing Derek's performance record. If I had looked at what that man could do instead of what degree he didn't have, Cole said, he'd still be here, and he'd be running this shop. The statement went viral, but it didn't help Cole. The internet had already made its judgment, and the judgment was clear. The system that built Sterling Ashford was the same system that discarded Derek Owens. Ashford felt it within 24 hours. The first domino fell at 8 a.m. the morning after the video dropped. Meridian Capital, his largest institutional partner, issued a 1-paragraph statement announcing they were pausing all active engagements with Ashford Development Group pending a review of corporate culture and leadership values. By noon, 2 more partners followed. By the end of the business day, Ashford's company had lost 3 major development contracts worth a combined $340 million. His stock price dropped 11% in a single trading session, the largest single-day decline in the company's history. Ashford posted an apology video at 6 p.m., 38 seconds. He sat in his home office wearing a navy blazer and an expression that had been coached by a crisis PR firm hired 4 hours earlier. He read from a teleprompter positioned just below the camera line, close enough that most viewers wouldn't notice, but the internet noticed. Within an hour, someone had stabilized the footage and zoomed in on Ashford's eyes. The lateral tracking, left to right, was unmistakable. Screenshots circulated with the caption, "This man can't even apologize without a script." The apology video received 2 million views. It also received 400,000 dislikes and a comment section so toxic that Ashford's team disabled replies within 90 minutes. By day 3, the original video, Judge Whitmore's clean, unedited recording, crossed 15 million views. It had been translated into Spanish, Portuguese, French, Japanese, and Korean. News outlets from CNN to the BBC covered it. The Breakfast Club dedicated a full segment. A labor rights nonprofit used it in a fundraising campaign. And Derek? Derek didn't post anything, didn't do an interview, didn't hire a publicist. His phone, a 5-year-old Samsung with a cracked screen, had 412 unread messages when he checked it that evening after finishing his route. Messages from strangers, from veterans, from mechanics, from people who had been fired for not having the right paper, pushed to the ground for having the wrong skin, told their whole lives that their hands were only good for carrying other people's packages. One message came from an address he didn't recognize. A short email, 3 sentences, from someone who identified herself as a contact of Judge Whitmore's. It asked if he'd ever considered opening his own shop. 6 months later, a new sign went up on Dowling Street in 3rd Ward, Houston. It was painted by hand, black letters on a white background, no graphic designer, no logo agency. It read, Owens Precision Motors. Below it, in smaller letters, Specialist in European and Luxury Vehicles. Walk-ins welcome. The building was a converted auto body shop, 3 bays wide, with a roll-up door that stuck halfway, just like his father's. Derek had picked it on purpose. It sat 4 blocks from the corner where Earl Owens had spent 30 years fixing diesel trucks for working men. The neighborhood had changed since then. Condos where the corner stores used to be, coffee shops where the barber shops were. But the concrete under Derek's lift still smelled like motor oil, and that was enough. He hired 4 employees, all veterans. A Marine who'd spent 6 years working on helicopter turbines at Camp Pendleton. An Army combat medic who'd retrained as a welder. A Navy machinist's mate who could blueprint an engine block to tolerances tighter than factory spec. And a 22-year-old kid named Dawson, fresh out of the service, no degree, no connections, the same blank stare Derek had worn the day he walked into the unemployment office 4 years ago. Derek hired him first. The shop filled up fast. Word of mouth moved quicker than any ad campaign. Within 3 months, the wait list was 6 weeks long. Bentley owners from River Oaks, Porsche collectors from Memorial, a sheik's assistant who flew in from Dubai with a crated V8 and a handwritten note that said, "The man from the video, I want only him." Rolls-Royce North America sent a formal offer. Master technician, 6-figure salary, relocation to their Greenwich facility. Derek read the letter at his workbench, folded it, and put it in a drawer. He never responded. He kept 2 things on the wall above his desk. The first was a framed photograph of Earl Owens standing in front of his garage on Dowling Street, 1987. Arms crossed, grease on his forearms, the ghost of a smile on a face that didn't smile easily. The second was a handwritten note on a piece of cardboard, Earl's handwriting, tacked to the wall with a single nail. Skill doesn't wear a uniform. It wears calluses. Derek had found it in his father's toolbox after Earl passed. He'd carried it in his wallet for 11 years before framing it. One more thing lived in the shop. In a glass display case by the front door, mounted on a small wooden stand, was a brown delivery uniform. Faded at the shoulders, oil stain on the right sleeve that never came out. The name tag still pinned to the chest, D. Owens. Customers asked about it sometimes. Derek never explained. He'd just look at it for a second, then go back to work. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, 6 months and 4 days after the video that changed his life, Derek Owens lay on a creeper beneath a 2024 Bentley Continental GT. His hands, scarred, calloused, stained with fresh oil, moved through the undercarriage with the same rhythm they'd always had. Steady, certain, unhurried. A gospel station played softly from a speaker on the workbench. The smell of motor oil and black coffee filled the bay. He was home. Have you ever been judged for what you look like instead of what you can do? Drop your story in the comments. I read every one. If this hit you the way it hit me, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you already know what to do.